Hello, Bible students. It's time to talk about the prison letters. In Acts chapter 20, Paul decided to travel back to Jerusalem and go through a lot of the cities around Ephesus and Asia Minor that he had helped establish churches in. He'd been on his third missionary journey and he's traveling back. Once he gets to Jerusalem in Acts chapter 21, of course, he goes to the temple and he's still evangelizing. But what happens is he gets arrested. And he's arrested because they accused him of bringing a Gentile into the temple. Now, as a matter of fact, he didn't actually do that, but they accused him of it. And of course, God, of course, is working, and he takes that incident, that situation, and turns it into a blessing for the church and for his church. But Paul is arrested, and he's going to be put on trial. Now, they were so scared for Paul's life, they end up transferring him to Caesarea. And the reason why they did that was because Paul was a Roman citizen. The governor at the time was a man by the name of Felix. And Felix had him transferred because they feared for his life, and then he was going to put him on trial there. He brings the high priest, a man by the name of Ananias, up. And Ananias and a lawyer named Tertullus. And Tertullus, of course, accuses him of doing wrong, and they were out to get him because of the things he'd been doing in the church. Probably knew of Paul, because Paul, being a Jew that was against the church originally, remember, and he's converted, and life turned around 180 degrees, and so they bring him up to Caesarea. So Ananias the high priest, Tertullus the lawyer, and Felix is the governor. They can't really find anything he's done wrong other than these accusations, and because Paul is a Roman citizen, they're a little afraid of that. And so Felix just leaves him in prison for a couple of years, sort of hoping that Paul is going to bribe his way out of this situation. Of course, he doesn't, and he maintains his Christianity and his faith, and so he stays there for those couple of years. Felix goes out of office subsequently, and a man by the name of Festus becomes governor. It's kind of weird how that works, Felix to Festus, but Festus becomes governor, and he revisits the situation. And he asks the opinion of several people, and he's not really sure what to do with this. He wants to keep the Jews happy because he didn't want any unrest, but at the same time, he knows that something must be done about Paul. He brings on King Agrippa. And King Agrippa would be sort of like Herod in this later decade of the first century. And he asked King Agrippa's opinion. And so he gives audience to Paul before King Agrippa. And King Agrippa would be the man who infamously, perhaps, pretty well known, he asked Paul, "Are you trying to persuade me to become a Christian?" He actually might have said, "You've almost persuaded me to become a Christian," in Paul's sermon, basically. Paul was always teaching the gospel to people. So he does that. And King Agrippa says, "Are you trying to persuade me to become a Christian?" He also says, if you had not appealed to Caesar, as a Roman citizen had the right to do, we would set you free. So it's sort of ironic. I don't know if Paul was sad about that, but again, God working to expand his church. You know, Jesus had told the disciples in Acts chapter 1, about verse 20 or so, you know, you're going to go into the whole world. You're going to go to Jerusalem and all of Judea and Samaria and in the entire world, the ends of the earth, preaching the gospel. And that's part of God's plan, to take the gospel to Rome, perhaps through Paul. And so, and visit the other Christians there. But because he was a Roman citizen and he had appealed to Caesar, they couldn't let him go. And Festus, the new governor, is sort of stuck. And so he's going to send him to Rome. It should be noted, just a small point, that King Agrippa's wife was a woman by the name of Bernice. And some people rumored, and it's traditional or legendary, that Bernice perhaps had somewhat of an affair with Titus, the Roman general that later conquers Jerusalem in 70 AD. He later becomes emperor. There's a big arch there in the Roman Forum you can still actually visit. That Titus perhaps had an affair with King Agrippa's wife Bernice. It's mentioned in Acts, and it's just kind of a 6 degrees of separation connection there, the book of Acts, to a place you can actually still visit. When they leave and he goes, they're going to put him on a ship, and Paul is going to go to Rome to appeal to Caesar, and he'll have to wait on his appearance before Caesar. It takes them quite a while to get there across the Mediterranean Sea, and they stop in Crete and some different places. He ends up getting shipwrecked off the island of Malta, which is just south of the island of Sicily, off the coast of Italy. And so they get shipwrecked at Malta, later on get another boat, go to Sicily, and finally make it to the Italian coast. And Paul is greeted there by Christians from Rome at a place called Three Taverns. You can read about that again in the latter chapters of Acts, but Three Taverns is where the Roman Christians meet him. And then he travels into Rome on a road called the Appian Way, which is the oldest road leading into Rome, and you can still visit the Appian Way in the southern part of Rome. Goes through the old wall. It's kind of neat to go there, but Paul goes into Rome at that place, awaiting his trial. I'll talk more at another time about the things that go on in the different prison letters that are happening there. I will go ahead and tell you that he did have spent 2 years under arrest. I've already mentioned that, but he also had a ministry there while he was under house arrest. He didn't have an ankle bracelet like to monitor him now. He had a Roman soldier with him, but he was able to receive visitors, and he taught as many people as he could about the gospel of Christ, which was probably God's intention at the time. And that's the introduction to the prison letters, and we'll go into more detail later on. By the way, does anybody have any idea where I'm sitting while I'm talking about that? Let me give you a little background material again now. Paul was arrested in Jerusalem for bringing a Gentile into the temple. Felix was the first governor. Festus later becomes governor. Tertullus was the lawyer. Ananias was the high priest. King Agrippa says, "You persuade me to become a Christian," or you almost do. He also said, "We would release you, but you're a Roman citizen." King Agrippa was married to Bernice, and perhaps might have had an affair, somewhat a love affair, with Titus, the Roman general. That's a lot of rumor and legend there. They move him to Caesarea, that's Paul that is, and then they end up transferring him to Rome. He's shipwrecked in Malta, and then you can't believe how tight this helmet is on my head. It's totally squishing my left ear, and I can't hear anything out of that ear, and maybe won't be able to the rest of my life. But after that, it should be noted that Luke, the gospel writer of Luke, spent some time in Rome with Paul, and you can, and so that, and since he wrote Acts as well, that gives us a lot of credence to the things that goes on in the book of Acts. And I've already told you that he had somewhat of a limited ministry, but he was still able to teach a lot of people. In fact, the last verse of the book of Acts says that he taught boldly and no one could stop him, or without hindrance he spoke boldly and no one could stop him teaching. That kind of gets you Paul to Rome. But there's four prison letters. There are Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. We've already started talking about Ephesians, of course, this week in class. If you want to be able to remember those, and you don't just want to remember Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, it's EPC and another P, or it could be EPC PH for Philemon or Philippians, either way. But it's EPC P, so you might give it a little acrostic there and make it into a word and make it epic fail with a PH, you like that, or epic fat perhaps, or East Poinsett County Panthers, which they're not the Panthers, but it's East Poinsett County High School in Arkansas. If you're a memory crutch person, and I probably confused you, but it's Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Ephesians, again, we've already started talking about it a little bit, and I just messed that up. But Ephesians, I'm looking wrong at my notes here. I was looking at the wrong book. I actually want to start talking about Colossians first. Epaphras was a leader in the church in Colossae, and Epaphras came to Paul in Rome and visited him there with some good news and some bad news. The good news was that the church was expanding and growing in Colossae. The problem was they had kind of left for a new gospel, very much like we studied in Galatians, and there was a knowledge going on that was outside of Christ. There was even some ritualistic worship going on, and even angel worship. was going on in Colossae. And so for that reason, Paul really writes Colossians, and many people believe perhaps wrote the other letters as well for Tychicus to carry. Tychicus was Paul's messenger, and he was in Rome with him, but he was going to carry these letters back to Colossae, and then Ephesus, of course, and Philippi, and then Philemon is a personal letter to a man by the name of Philemon. But perhaps he took all four of these letters at the same time, which would explain some of the simplicity of them. The letter of Colossians was a circular letter like the others were too, but their main twin city or their neighboring city was a city by the Laodicea. We know about Laodicea because of the book of Revelation. That's the lukewarm city. And so it was going to be shared with not only Colossae, the church there, but also Laodicea. And again, Tychicus was going to carry these letters to Colossae, to Philippi, Ephesus, and then Philemon. I have to turn the camera off now and change because my head's going to explode. Bible, I apologize for the wind blowing, but what Bible video would be complete without a little rooftop time? A little roof time. It is a beautiful day. It is a little bit breezy. I don't know if it's a day like it would be in Rome in Paul's time, but perhaps. Now, Paul wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Those are his prison letters he wrote from Rome while he was in prison there. Now, he stayed in Rome in prison for about 2 years under house arrest, waiting to see Caesar. Now, tradition tells us, or legend perhaps, and some other early writings, that Paul later goes back to Rome under arrest and is executed, actually about late 60s in the first century, well before probably the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So probably 67, 68, 69 AD, before the fall of Jerusalem. Paul perhaps is executed just outside of Rome for his faith. But while there he wrote these letters. Now, he wrote, of course, Philippians is a great, there's another report. Philippi is in Macedonia. Now, don't get Epaphras confused with Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is another man that came to visit Paul on behalf of the church at Philippi in Macedonia. And basically, Paul writes back to them just to give them thanks for the gift. Remember, the Macedonians were so generous in their gift to the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. So he thanks them for their gift. He tells them a little about his circumstances and his condition. I thought I was about to get attacked by an alien over there. I don't believe we can get it on film. I think it's a raccoon, perhaps a possum. I don't think it's a bobcat. But then he tells them about his condition and his circumstances, and then he just writes them to strengthen them. Of course, a famous verse, of course, out of Philippians being, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, out of the 4th chapter of Philippians. So he just wants to strengthen them. Philemon is a personal letter. Onesimus was a runaway slave that comes in contact with Paul. Of course, God working there, and Paul converts him to Christianity, and then sort of convinces him he may need to go back. But he writes Philemon, who is Onesimus' owner, and says, why don't you just let him stay with me? But if you want him to return, I understand. But treat him like a Christian brother, because Philemon is believed to be a believer, a member of the church at Colossae, and knows Epaphras, who visited Paul on behalf of the Colossian church. And so he writes Philemon one chapter letter, personal letter, saying, I have Onesimus, he's become a Christian, so treat him like a brother. And then, of course, Ephesians, that we've already started talking about Ephesians, and basically I think he wrote Ephesians because he knew that Tychicus and the others traveling back, remember Tychicus was his messenger, would travel through Ephesus, that was the port city of Asia Minor. So why not go ahead and write that church another circular letter, and that has no personal greetings or personal messages in it. There's no names in Ephesians. It's just a general pass this around circular letter for all the churches there in Asia Minor, for them to do better, continue in the faith. And I've told you that, of course, it's written almost like a sermon outline. It's so beautiful, page after chapter after page of beautiful things that Paul is saying in the Holy Spirit speaking through him. A wonderful section of Ephesians, of course, about the unity of the church, the unity of Christians, and what we need to strive for, and all our blessings that are in Christ is a key phrase there in Ephesians. But remember, the prison letters are Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, the big fail with a PH, East Poinsett County, and you remember your key characters: Onesimus the slave, Philemon the slave owner, Epaphras from Colossae, Epaphroditus from Philippi in Macedonia, and of course all the history of Paul being led to Rome. This is prison letters. You can continue on and find your quiz now, and I know you'll do well. And Cyber Day may not be quite the nuclear disaster that it's been before, but perhaps. Here's a quick shot of Pinnacle Mountain. And that would be the transformer right there that I hit the golf ball into that time too.